So friends, breaking news live on air. Russia may soon launch the Oreshnik again against Ukraine. This threat is coming from the Russian Ministry of Killings and is confirmed by monitoring channels. At the same time, Russia may have struck its own positions with the Oreshnik during the previous attack on Ukraine. And also, the legendary Azov is returning to Mariupol. We will show this footage. The unit has published a video of strikes on Russian positions in the temporarily occupied city. Meanwhile, Tsikhanouskaya is in Kyiv and Lukashenko is throwing a fit in Minsk. Details of the Belarusian opposition leader's visit, and as always, rubrika without comment. Putin's parrot Dugin declared that in Russia, the internet must be earned and distributed in portions. Hello friends, this is the Priscil Project. My name is Vladimir Timoshenko. Let's get started. And the main topic, new drama around Oreshnik. Well, first of all, details are emerging regarding Russia's use. The second Oreshnik ballistic missile was used during the attack on Ukraine on the night of May 24th. As for the first Oreshnik, I think you all remember it. Yes, it heroically fought against Ukrainian garages in the city of Bila Tserkva. Right now you can see what was happening there. A super expensive, unparalleled monster. It fights against a garage cooperative in a small town in the Kyiv region. Quite the embodiment of modern Russia, isn't it? Well, okay, but what's more interesting is something else. Right now, all the Telegram channels are writing about this. It turns out that on that terrible night, the Kremlin terrorists could have launched 2 Oreshniks at once. Then here is the most important part. The second Oreshnik most likely fell. Where? That's right, on the positions of the Russians themselves. Here's the information we have. Friends, Ukrainian monitoring channels report that during the attack on the night of May 24th, Russia launched 2 Oreshniks at once. According to their data, the first missile fell on temporarily occupied territory near Donetsk, in the area of Avdiivka or Yasinuvata, and it likely hit Russian troops themselves. After that, a second launch was carried out, this time targeting Bila Tserkva. Well, friends, it's really hard to comment on this, as they say, the Russian pseudo-empire in all its glory, and at the same time, the Kremlin. Let's switch to the studio now, because this has no analogs. It's already nauseating to look at Oreshnik. And yet that very Kremlin continues to threaten Ukraine, and specifically Kyiv, with new strikes. Right away, Maria Zakharova, known in everyday life as Masha Stakan, took the floor. Do you remember that? And so, retaliatory strikes have been and will continue to be carried out against Kyiv, declared Maria Zakharova. She noted that the Russian Foreign Ministry will soon issue a special statement which will lay out in detail a warning to the Foreign Diplomatic Corps. Well, as they say, you should have a bite to eat with your drinks. But jokes aside, Ukrainian monitoring channels confirm that Russia really might be preparing a new launch of the Oreshnik during the upcoming attacks on Ukraine. Speaking for myself, it wouldn't be so bad if that birdhouse hit Russian soldiers again. As they say, we can do it again, right? That's what you say over there in your swamps, isn't it? And now, friends, let's talk about something truly important. The legendary Azov is beginning its return home. Home to their native Ukrainian Mariupol. Here's the point. Here's what it's about. In the 1st Corps of the National Guard, Azov, they demonstrated strikes on occupier targets near the Russian border, specifically on the Mariupol-Taganrog and Mariupol-Volnovakha highways. To quote directly, Azov is patrolling the border area around Mariupol. Pilots of the 1st Corps of the National Guard of Ukraine, Azov, are already carrying out missions to strike targets near the Russian border. Right now you can see the footage where that very border was clearly marked. And now, Azov also showed footage of battles, more precisely, footage of the destruction of Russian military equipment on the Mariupol-Taganrog and Mariupol-Volnovakha highways. Safe? Well, in fact, there will definitely no longer be any safe places for the occupiers, my friends. Well, let's move on. Moreover, on May 8th, pilots from the 1st Corps of the Azov National Guard demonstrated the operation of reconnaissance strike complexes in Mariupol and announced that they were patrolling roads up to 160 kilometers from the line of combat engagement. The strikes were carried out specifically on the so-called Novorossiya highway. This is that very land corridor of the Russians' attention to the temporarily occupied Crimea. This corridor was supposed to ensure the transfer of weapons and personnel to Crimea by the occupiers, but it has become a real road of death for them. See for yourself. These are some of the most telling shots, filmed by truck and cargo drivers. Take a look. Along this highway, let me emphasize again, along the Taganrog-Melitopol route, the enemy was supposed to transport ammunition and military equipment to the temporarily occupied Crimea. But now this road has become a road of death for the occupiers themselves. Near Melitopol, fuel tankers and military trucks are burning. Melitopol propaganda telegram channels themselves are publishing the aftermath of strikes on the Russian army's logistics. In the footage that has appeared online, you can see completely burned out tankers. Here you see these ruins and trucks on the highway. Melitopol, Mariupol. Russian commentators are complaining. Apparently, what about? Ukrainian drones are striking transport on the supply route and trying to disrupt the logistics of the occupying army. Well, of course, this logistics will be disrupted once and for all, that's clear. And in general, let's talk in more detail about Crimea. More precisely about how the armed forces of Ukraine are bringing it back home. Another round of strikes on Russian military facilities. In particular, in Jankoy, here are the details. Yes, regarding the details, right now. This segment will be ready in just a few minutes. And now another extremely important topic. A topic that is being discussed right now throughout the entire civilized world. So, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya is in Kyiv, and Lukashenko, where is he? That's right, he's throwing a fit back in Minsk. It's really getting tense. It's not funny. The situation on the Ukrainian-Belarusian border remains. The threat of invasion remains. And it was at this moment that Svetlana Tikhanovskaya arrived in Kyiv. This is how it was. Let's take a look. There's something I want to point out. In fact, Zelenskyy was trolling with this visit. Lukashenko. Do you know why? First of all, this is a response to Alexander Lukashenko's recent statement about being ready for contacts with Kyiv. Earlier, the head of Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Andriy Sybiha, essentially publicly contrasted Lukashenko with Tikhanovskaya, stating that Ukraine has someone to talk to regarding Belarus. In other words, not Lukashenko. In this way, Kyiv is demonstrating that contact with Belarusian society can and should be established through the democratic opposition and not through Lukashenko, who is not only perceived as, but actually is, an accomplice in Russian aggression against Ukraine. Secondly, all of this is an attempt to politically separate the Lukashenko regime from the Belarusian people. This is important for Ukraine, very important, because Belarus truly remains an ally of Russia, and Russian troops and infrastructure are stationed on its territory. And as you know, at the same time, Kyiv is trying not to alienate a part of Belarusian society, the majority in fact, who are genuinely opposed to the war and the regime. So friends, right now for your attention. Exclusive details of Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya's visit to Kyiv today. Let's watch the report and then we'll return to our studio.
The leader of the Belarusian opposition, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, has arrived in Ukraine for the first time on an official visit at the invitation of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. During her trip, she plans to meet with the Ukrainian leadership, Belarusian volunteers and fighters from the Tsikhanouskaya regiment. The opposition leader's visit is primarily political and symbolic, since Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya has virtually no real influence over processes inside Belarus. But for Kyiv, her visit sends a signal in several directions at once, writes Union. For example, Belarus formally remains an ally of Russia and Russian troops are stationed on its territory. At the same time, Kyiv is trying not to alienate that part of Belarusian society which opposes the war and the regime. Let us recall that recently Alexander Lukashenko declared his readiness for contacts with Kyiv.
If he wants to talk about something, to consult, or maybe something else, please, we are open to that. I am ready to meet with him anywhere in Ukraine or Belarus and discuss the issues of Belarusian-Ukrainian relations. And maybe talk about the prospects.
At the same time, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, while in Slavutich in northern Ukraine, promised to keep the de facto leadership of Belarus on their toes.
We have the capacity to strengthen ourselves. We also have the ability to work preventively regarding Russian territories. There could be a threat from there. And regarding the leadership of Belarus, which should be kept on their toes, in other words, they should really feel that there will be consequences if there are aggressive actions against.
One of the main objectives of the visit is to create permanent mechanisms of cooperation between Ukraine and Belarusian democratic structures. We need to institutionalize this cooperation. We would like to see an interdepartmental group on Belarus and the appointment of a special representative and the ongoing work of the mission of democratic forces. It is important that Belarusian organizations in Ukraine also participate in this. For the first time since February 2022, French President Emmanuel Macron called Lukashenko. This was reported by the press service of the Belarusian leader as well as the French TV channel TF1. Lukashenko's office reported that the conversation was allegedly initiated by the French side. The statement from the office of the Belarusian dictator says the following.
The heads of state discussed regional issues and Belarus's relations with the EU and France, in particular.
A source close to Macron told the French TV channel TF1 that he had a productive conversation with Lukashenko. During this conversation, the president of France, in particular, emphasized the risks that exist for Belarus if it allows itself to be drawn into Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine. He also called on Alexander Lukashenko to take the necessary steps to improve relations between Belarus and Europe, the source noted. The last time Emmanuel Macron called Alexander Lukashenko was on February 26, 2022, that is, on the third day of the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, which in particular was taking place from the territory of a supposedly sovereign state, the Republic of Belarus. At that time, they spoke for 1 hour and 20 minutes. The president of France urged Lukashenko to ensure the withdrawal of Russian troops from Belarus as soon as possible. And he warned him not to become a vassal and an actual accomplice of Putin in his aggression. In addition, Macron also warned the official Minsk at that time against deploying Russian nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus. But Lukashenko did exactly the opposite. In May of this year, the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, announced plans for targeted mobilization of certain military units to prepare for possible combat operations. At the same time, he claimed that Belarus was committed to peace.
Well, you definitely can't trust Lukashenko. We are following Tsikhanouskaya's visit to Kyiv. By the way, friends, it's coming up very soon. As part of our project In the Crosshairs, you can look forward to an exclusive interview with Tatiana Martinova, a Belarusian opposition journalist. It will be a very interesting conversation, don't miss it. And by the way, at this time, Macron had a phone conversation with that very self-proclaimed president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko. This is the first conversation since 2022 between the president of France and the so-called leader of Belarus. And people in the French president's inner circle shared details of this very conversation in comments to a local French TV channel. According to the channel's sources, Macron had, and I quote, a constructive conversation with Lukashenko. Journalists note that the leaders of France and Belarus discussed in particular, of course, the war in Ukraine, and then quote the conversation. During this conversation, Emmanuel Macron specifically emphasized the risks that Belarus faces by getting involved in Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine. In other words, let me put it simply. Macron is telling Lukashenko, Kolya, if you make a move again, or if Russian troops cross into Ukraine from your border like they did in 2022, you'll get a slap on the wrist. And why will you get it? Because it's not 2022 anymore. A lot has changed in the world over these 4 years, but more on that later. So another very important point, friends. Subscribe to Union to know the truth about what's happening in Ukraine and in the rest of the civilized world. And of course, to see how modern Putin's Russia is plunging into the abyss. And by the way, speaking of the Russian abyss, do you remember that swampy pseudo-philosopher Dugin? Well, that's the one who lost his own daughter because of the war and because of the war that Putin started. Time has passed and that very same Dugin, whom I'm sure you remember, is still kissing up to Putin himself even now. And he claims that, attention, this is really a joke, the internet, in Russia you have to earn it. Not pay for it through a provider, but earn it. And according to Dugin, this very internet should be given out in portions. This is our regular segment. No comments. Let's listen.
It seems that it could be given out in portions for good behavior, for example. That is, you have to learn how to use the internet, you have to grow up to the internet, you have to earn it. But here's why I noticed that as soon as they started blocking Telegram, people are already out and about shouting something. Someone is already whistling at their dacha or in the city. And it reminded me of normal life when people used to live. They lived out on the street, lived with each other through communication. We didn't used to chat from different ends of our own house. We would just meet up and discuss important issues. It's just that as we gradually move into the virtual world, we lose ourselves. And maybe, instead of giving it up completely and abruptly, maybe, while the weather is good from spring to autumn, it's really worth it. Let's try living a full real life for a while. There are so many wonderful, amazing cafes.
In Alexander Dugin's beautiful Russia of the future, the internet is given out in portions for good behavior.
And more in winter when
It's cold. You know, I just thought of it. It's a nightmare for a normal person. Dugin and the pseudo-liberal Sobchak together in a pink room. What could possibly be scarier than that? Write in the comments if, God forbid, you ever dream of something like that. Yeah, and honestly, the Russian world is of course incurable. So one more topic. That very Russia, not only is it on fire with poorly armed Ukrainian forces, but now it's also sinking underwater. Floods in the Republic of Adygea, and the authorities are once again silent about it. There's a strong feeling that something similar will soon happen in Chechnya and Dagestan as well. It's all happened before. Let's watch the report, then we'll return to the studio and discuss what's happening right now in temporarily occupied Crimea. Please.
The Republic of Adygea in Russia is going underwater after heavy rains. Streets and courtyards are flooded. Residents are complaining that they can't get any help from the authorities. People have been trying for days to reach the administration.
Unfortunately, I can't show everything because I simply can't get through here this Monday. There was a heavy rain in the evening. Starting Tuesday, I began calling the administration to send a truck to pump out the water. There was much more water before. They sent one small truck late Tuesday evening. It supposedly pumped out the water, but it didn't make any difference.
After that, local residents kept asking the authorities for help, but to no avail.
They stopped responding to anything at all. They are aware of the problem. The road is completely destroyed because of this puddle, and we, the residents of the street, have to repair it ourselves at our own expense. Every year.
There are no storm drains along the road, and the asphalt itself is in terrible condition, and the regular flooding only makes things worse.
Pensioners can't even go out to buy bread. Children go to school barefoot. Then, after the puddle, they put their shoes on.
A few days earlier, Buryatia was hit by floods. Heavy rainfall caused the rivers to overflow. Roads were submerged. Villages in Buryatia have been cut off from the world. A state of heightened alert has already been declared in several districts of Buryatia due to the floods. Buryatia was also unexpectedly hit by a snowstorm. According to the Buryat Hydrometeorological Center, there remains an increased avalanche risk in the Republic. In one of the districts, about 25 centimeters of snow fell on May 21st. Earlier in Yakutia, due to large-scale flooding, electricity supply was temporarily restricted. Residents were evacuated from several settlements. Residential houses, yards, and entire districts of the Republic ended up underwater.
So friends, now, as promised, let's talk about the situation in the occupied Crimea. Well, first of all, the land corridor has become a road of death for the Russians. That's really the case. You just saw it yourself. Secondly, the armed forces of Ukraine are regularly depleting Russian air defenses in Crimea, thereby bringing the inevitable return of Crimea to its native Ukrainian harbor ever closer. And the third point, explosions continue on the territory of Russian military facilities. Every day. In particular, some very interesting things are happening in Jankoy. What exactly? My colleagues will tell and show you right now. Let's watch.
On the night of May 23rd, drones attacked temporarily occupied Crimea in Jankoy and powerful explosions were heard. After the drone strikes, a fire broke out near the railway tracks. This was reported by the Telegram channel Crimean Wind, citing satellite imagery data. Heat signals are being recorded on the railway tracks near the station. It is likely that a train carrying fuel or military equipment is on fire. A massive attack by drones also took place on the night of May 23rd. Novorossiysk. Local residents are publishing footage of air defense systems in action. There are reports of a fire at the Grushevaya Balka oil depot and at the Sheskaris oil transshipment terminal, the largest in southern Russia. It handles the reception, storage, and export shipment of oil and petroleum products onto tankers. In the middle of the night, sirens from the warning system for drone and missile threats were sounding. Local residents complained about explosions. Subsequently, the operational headquarters of Krasnodar Krai reported that debris from downed UAVs had fallen in Novorossiysk. Supposedly, it was because of this, and not due to direct strikes, that a fire broke out at the oil depot, where several technical and administrative buildings caught fire. In addition, fragments of drones fell on the territory of the fuel terminal. In Permkrai, the city of Gubaka came under drone attack. It
is flying.
The strike hit the Metafrex chemical plant, one of the largest producers of methanol and chemical products in Russia. The distance from the Ukrainian border to the facility is 1,600 kilometers. The plant produces substances that are used in the manufacture of explosives and weapons components. In Udmurtia, an air raid alert was also declared on the morning of May 23rd. According to the Telegram channel Astro Drones, there may have been an attempt to attack a power substation.
Basically right over there in that spot. That is exactly where it was burning.
There was a drone threat over there. And in Irkutsk, a Russian scientific center specializing in technologies for the extraction and processing of gold, rare and precious metals caught fire.
So friends, as you know, we are working live and news is coming in and being updated every second. We bring you the most up-to-date information about what is happening in the Russian-Ukrainian war. And of course, there is little positivity in the next piece of news. But nevertheless, it is important to know and stay informed. So, the head of the communications department of the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Yuri Ignat, makes the following statement. I will quote. The coming days may be very dangerous and difficult for Ukraine. Russia is preparing a massive attack on Kyiv, while Ukraine, it is experiencing a serious shortage of air defense missiles needed to intercept ballistic targets. Yes, as you can see, we started our broadcast with Zakharova threatening Ukraine with a new strike, and we see that the Ukrainian military leadership is voicing, through people responsible for public relations, unpleasant facts, but it's better to be prepared. Indeed, friends, take care of yourselves and respond to the air raid sirens because we are dealing with a very cynical, treacherous, and let's be honest, unscrupulous enemy. But we will definitely defeat them anyway. Moreover, as you know, the Russian Federation is in fact falling apart from within. So let's talk about the situation in Chechnya. Who comes after Kadyrov? The eternal question. Well, you know, in Russia, as they say, who is to blame? You know the answer, fools and roads. And who comes after Kadyrov? Another classic question. Putin no longer supports him the way he used to. They have those so-called elections coming up over there in the swamps. So, according to the Western press, there are 4 scenarios for who might replace Dondon. There are candidates to suit every taste. That includes Adam Kadyrov and Akhmet Kadyrov. Naturally, Aladdin slippers, well, excuse me, that's what I mean, Abdelaudinov. So who will actually lead Chechnya? Who will become the new Chechen Padishah after Kadyrov Sr. finally fades into oblivion? Let's take a look at our exclusive report and draw the appropriate conclusions.
The current model of governing Chechnya, based on the symbiosis between Vladimir Putin and Ramzan Kadyrov, is becoming increasingly fragile due to the Chechen leader's health problems. This is stated in a report by an American analytical center. And the main question is, who will rule Chechnya next? Researchers have identified 4 scenarios for the republic: maintaining the status quo if Kadyrov's health stabilizes, a change of power from Moscow, Kadyrov's sudden death, and a popular uprising in Chechnya. According to the researchers, in the event of a change of power from Moscow, candidates from Kadyrov's inner circle may be considered for the position of head of Chechnya. Kadyrov's inner circle, his former fellow villager and now the Prime Minister of Chechnya, Magomed Daudov. Kadyrov's brother-in-law, former commander of the Akhmat unit known for persecuting the local LGBT community, Abu Zaid Vizmuradov. And Kadyrov's relative, Deputy Adam Delimkhanov. If Putin is sidelined as a result of a split, the elite may place their bets on controllable technocrats. The authors also consider the scenario of a coup in Chechnya and the rise to power of the liberal opposition. As a possible candidate, the civil activist Ruslan Kutayev is mentioned. And in the event of Kadyrov's sudden death, his successors could be his children. Kadyrov appointing his children to high-ranking positions indicates an attempt to ensure family succession. However, analysts write that it is unlikely power will be transferred to them. Fewer and fewer Chechens want to die for Putin. In Ukraine, a corruption scheme was uncovered in the Russian special unit Akhmat. Occupiers pay from 500,000 rubles for transfers from other units. All this is done in order to have a clear term of service, reports the partisan movement Atesh. And this is not surprising. The Kadyrovite TikTok troops are having no luck in Ukraine. On May 20th, drone forces carried out a series of strikes on a Russian Special Forces training center. The target was the training and production complex of the Seva Akhmat Special Purpose Regiment. The operation was named Akhmat Snow. This was reported by the commander of the Ukrainian Armed Forces drone systems. Robert Madhyar Brody.
So, dear friends, this was the project in the crosshairs. My name is Volodymyr Tymoshenko. Subscribe to Union to truly know the truth, because for us it is very important to bring you only truthful information. We will definitely see each other again soon. This was Volodymyr Tymoshenko with you. Goodbye. Take care of yourselves.